In the chilling blackness of a November night, 1120, a helmsman, far too deep in his cups, tragically rammed his ship into a jagged Normandy rock. Can you imagine the chaos? The screams, the splintering wood, the icy embrace of the channel? Within minutes, the white ship, a vessel carrying the cream of Anglo-Norman society, split apart. Among the drowned was William Adelin, the sole legitimate heir to England's throne, a young man whose life was snuffed out before it truly began. This single devastating event didn't just claim lives. It shattered a dynasty and, inadvertently, set the stage for a woman unlike any other to step into the brutal spotlight of medieval politics. Every baron in the realm had sworn an oath to him, an oath that would soon be broken. From that wreck, from that unforeseen tragedy, rose the only woman ever to march armies across England in her own name, a figure of fierce determination and royal blood. Yet, despite her monumental efforts and undeniable claim, she was nearly erased from the list of crowned monarchs. Let me introduce you to Empress Matilda, the queen who, by all accounts, won the war, but somehow, heartbreakingly, never quite wore the crown. Her story is a testament to resilience, a masterclass in political maneuvering, and a stark reminder of how history often overlooks its most formidable women. Most of us, if prompted, could probably rattle off a few Tudor wives or point out a notorious Plantagenet villain, right? But ask about Matilda, and often you're met with a blank stare. She remains this incredible ghost in the grand narrative of England, a whisper rather than a shout. And that's a real shame, because her life was nothing short of epic. She was the daughter of one king, the widow of a Holy Roman Emperor, and the mother of an entire dynasty, the formidable Plantagenets. For one chaotic, pivotal year, she was the uncontested ruler of England. Think about it. Coins were struck with her image, charters were sealed with her authority, and yes, the Londoners, ever resistant, groaned under her taxes. But then, in a single dramatic afternoon, the capital slammed its gates shut, and her coronation, once so tantalizingly close, melted away like the snow she'd later trudged through to escape Oxford Castle. Today, we're going to follow her journey from the gilded halls of European palaces to the mud-soaked battlefields of England. From the weight of a Holy Roman coronet to the chilling expanse of the frozen Thames. We're going to ask a simple yet profound question. How did the rightful heir, a woman of immense power and experience, become the forgotten queen? How did someone so instrumental to England's very foundation end up as little more than a footnote? It's a story of ambition, betrayal, and the sheer, stubborn will of a woman who refused to be denied. King Henry I, Matilda's father, was not what you'd call the sentimental type. He was a pragmatist, a ruler who governed with the cold, calculating efficiency of an accountant, albeit one who also happened to wield a very large sword. He was known for his administrative prowess, his keen eye for detail, and his relentless pursuit of order. So when his 17-year-old son, William Adelin, tragically drowned in the White Ship disaster of 1120, Henry's world, and indeed the future of England, was plunged into a crisis. William Adelin was not just a son, he was the future, the male heir upon whom all hopes of a stable succession rested. His death left Henry without a legitimate male heir, a catastrophic blow in a world where male primogeniture was the unquestioned norm. Now, what's a medieval CEO to do when his primary asset, his male heir, is suddenly gone? Henry did what he always did. He looked for the next best asset, and that asset was his daughter, Matilda. She was born around 1102, probably in Winchester or Sutton Courtenay. From a young age, she was destined for greatness, or at least for a politically advantageous marriage. At just 7 years old, her father betrothed her to the Holy Roman Emperor, Henry V, who was about 16 years her senior. By the age of 8, she was shipped off to Germany to be educated, immersed in a world of high diplomacy and imperial administration. She was married before she even turned 12, crowned Empress in Rome in 1117, and even served as imperial regent in Italy. This wasn't some sheltered princess. This was a woman who had seen the inner workings of Europe's most powerful court, who spoke Latin fluently, and who had been addressed across the continent as Empress Matilda for years. She was, in many ways, an incredibly experienced and formidable figure. When her first husband, Emperor Henry V, died childless in 1125, Henry I wasted no time. He yanked his now widowed daughter back to Normandy, seeing her as his only hope. He gathered his powerful barons in Rouen Castle and, in a scene that must have been thick with tension, made them swear on holy relics that they would accept Matilda as his successor, as their future queen. It was an unprecedented demand. England had never had a reigning queen. The barons, caught between their oath and their ingrained prejudices, crossed themselves, muttered a reluctant, "So be it," and went home grumbling. Can you hear them? A woman on the throne. That feels about as natural as a nun in a jousting tournament. The idea was unsettling, even scandalous to many. The notion of female rule, especially in her own right, was largely unprecedented and deeply challenged the patriarchal norms of the 12th century. Still, the oath was given, the parchment sealed, and for the next decade, Matilda shadowed her father. She was learning the ropes, absorbing the intricacies of governance, hearing pleas, and quietly, shrewdly, stockpiling allies. To our modern eyes, she looks like the perfect successor, battle-tested by continental politics, fluent in the language of power, and, crucially, the only legitimate child of the king left breathing. But to Norman eyes, steeped in tradition and male-dominated succession, she looked like a dangerous novelty. She was proud, sharp-tongued, and, to make matters worse, inconveniently remarried. Her new husband was a teenager named Geoffrey of Anjou, a man whose very name, Angevin, made every Norman baron wince. Anjou was a rival territory, and this marriage was seen as a strategic alliance rather than a love match, further complicating her position. The stage was set for conflict. The year 1135 was drawing to a close when, on December 1st, King Henry I finally met his end. The chroniclers, with a touch of medieval flair, claimed it was after indulging in too many lampreys, a type of eel-like fish. Whatever the cause, his death plunged England and Normandy into immediate crisis. Matilda, his designated heir, was in Anjou, heavily pregnant, and perhaps still reeling from recent arguments with her father over castles. For reasons that still puzzle historians, she didn't act immediately to secure her inheritance. Meanwhile, across the Channel, a different kind of ambition was stirring. Stephen of Blois, Matilda's charming, popular cousin, the very man who had carried her banner at her wedding, saw his chance. He was a grandson of William the Conqueror, well-liked, and considered an efficient and capable man. He was also conveniently placed in Boulogne. Despite warnings of a severe storm, Stephen didn't hesitate. He galloped to London, a city eager for strong leadership and weary of uncertainty. He sweet-talked the citizens, promising them tax breaks and, even more significantly, commune status, which granted them greater control over their city's affairs. He bribed the Archbishop of Canterbury with promises of church reform, knowing that the church's support was paramount for legitimacy. And then, with breathtaking speed, he had himself crowned on December 22nd. Barely 3 weeks after Henry III's death, Stephen wore the crown, proclaiming it God's will. The sheer speed of this coup still makes historians blink in amazement. One moment, Stephen was a middling count, with a rather ignominious reputation for running away at Antioch. The next, he was King of England. It was a bold, decisive move that completely blindsided Matilda. Matilda, 8 months pregnant in Normandy, heard the news. Can you imagine her fury? The goblet she slammed down must have dented the tabletop, a physical manifestation of her rage. She had been promised the throne, sworn oaths, and now it was snatched away by her own cousin. She vowed to take back what was rightfully hers, what her father had so painstakingly secured for her. But the barons, those same men who had sworn solemn oaths on holy relics, suddenly found those oaths to be rather slippery things. Faced with a new crowned king, they largely shrugged and hailed Stephen as the present king. And just like that, England was plunged into 19 years of brutal civil war. Chroniclers, witnessing the widespread breakdown of law and order, simply called it the Anarchy. It wasn't just a fight for the crown. It was a period where, as one chronicler grimly put it, Christ and his saints slept, implying a total collapse of justice and divine order. Castles were erected unlawfully, churches were converted into fortresses, and local vendettas spiraled into widespread violence. This wasn't merely a squabble between royals. It was a war that tore at the very fabric of society, with ordinary people suffering immensely in the crossfire. The year is 1139. Autumn winds sweep across the English Channel, and with them comes Empress Matilda. This wasn't some grand triumphant invasion force, but a determined landing at Arundel, a strategic castle on the south coast. She wasn't alone, though. By her side was her formidable half-brother, Robert of Gloucester, a man who knew his way around a battlefield and was fiercely loyal to her cause. Her purse was stuffed with Angevin gold, courtesy of her husband Geoffrey, providing crucial funds for mercenaries. And, perhaps most surprisingly, she had a small 6-year-old son named Henry, who would one day not only plant the Plantagenet tree, but become one of England's most powerful monarchs. This wasn't the teenage Empress of Germany anymore. This was a 37-year-old widow, hardened by imperial politics, a woman whose imperial bearing was now coupled with a glare that, it was said, could freeze beer. She was a seasoned politician and military leader, far more capable than many of her male contemporaries. Her plan was textbook Angevin strategy, refined by years of observation and experience. Secure the West Country, a region known for its loyalty and defensibility, link up with Welsh mercenaries, and effectively squeeze Stephen between the unwavering loyalty of Gloucester and the rich silver of Bristol. Within months, her strategy began to pay off. She held a string of castles stretching from Gloucester to Devizes, establishing a formidable power base. She began to issue charters, official documents that asserted her authority, boldly declaring Matilda de Gratia Domina Anglorum, Matilda, by the grace of God, Lady of the English. And, in a powerful symbolic move, she started minting pennies stamped with her own face, a clear and undeniable assertion of her claim to the throne. This was a direct challenge to Stephen's authority, a visual proclamation that there was another legitimate ruler in England. Stephen, of course, tried to dislodge her. He launched campaigns, attempting to break her hold on the West. But the West Country was a difficult terrain for invaders, sticky with marshes, riddled with loyal knights, and dotted with castles specifically designed to laugh at siege engines. These were not easily conquered strongholds. They were formidable defensive structures, often built on high ground or surrounded by natural obstacles. The war settled into a grim, protracted chess match. It was a war of attrition, marked by sieges, raiding, and skirmishes, rather than grand-pitched battles. You'd capture a castle here, lose a supply train there. Loyalty shifted, lands changed hands, and the common people suffered immensely. Neither side could land a decisive blow, creating a frustrating stalemate. Then in February 1141, fortune dealt Matilda a joker. In a significant blunder, Stephen allowed himself to be ambushed at Lincoln. His forces were defeated by Matilda's half-brother Robert of Gloucester and Ranulph of Chester. In the ensuing battle, Stephen was captured, and just like that, he found himself Matilda's prisoner. This was a monumental victory, a moment that seemed to turn the tide definitively in her favor. With the reigning king in chains, Matilda's path to the crown seemed clear. With Stephen locked away in the grim confines of Bristol's keep, Matilda's moment had arrived. In June 1141, she rode triumphantly toward London, planning the coronation that would rubber-stamp her victory and cement her as England's first queen. This was it, the culmination of years of struggle, the fulfillment of her father's oath. She made her entry with a grand procession surrounded by bishops and nobles, and took up residence at Westminster. She wore white silk, a symbol of purity and sovereignty, and immediately took control of the exchequer, the royal treasury. But then she made a critical misstep, one that would cost her dearly. In preparation for a coronation, it was customary for the incoming monarch to grant concessions and tax remissions to the citizens of London. Londoners, always a pragmatic and independent lot, expected their traditional liberties and a break from heavy burdens. But Matilda, perhaps hardened by years of imperial rule and unaccustomed to negotiating with a merchant class, refused. She ordered the city to pay a tax so steep it felt less like a levy and more like ransom, alienating a crucial power base. Londoners grumbled, their discontent simmering. They found her arrogant, unyielding, and unwilling to compromise. Some chroniclers even suggested she tried to deepen her voice to sound more masculine, a desperate attempt to fit a role that society insisted only a man could fill. Her refusal to negotiate, her perceived haughtiness, and her demanding nature quickly eroded any goodwill she might have had. Meanwhile, across the Thames, a formidable rival was rallying her forces. Queen Matilda of Boulogne, Stephen's equally determined wife. This was a war of the two Matildas, and Stephen's queen proved to be a force to be reckoned with. She refused to surrender and actively took command of Stephen's forces, demonstrating remarkable leadership. She first tried to negotiate, offering to take Stephen into exile if Empress Matilda would guarantee their son's inheritance, but the Empress refused. Undeterred, Queen Matilda established a secure base in Kent and began to raise an army, burning and ravaging the countryside around London, intensifying the pressure. And then, on the very eve of Empress Matilda's coronation, the bells of St. Paul's rang out. But it wasn't for jubilation. It was for revolt. The London crowds, incited by Queen Matilda's forces and their own grievances, erupted in open rebellion. Empress Matilda was forced to flee, barefoot, through the dark, hostile streets, her slippers left behind like some twisted, reverse Cinderella. She never again entered London as queen. Her moment in the sun, her 40 days as Lady of the English, had crumbled. 6 months later, her forces suffered a devastating blow at Winchester, where her crucial half-brother, Robert of Gloucester, was captured. In a desperate exchange, she had to trade Stephen himself for her brother's freedom. The crown, so close to her grasp, slipped back onto Stephen's head. Matilda's brief, tantalizing reign folded into a legend of what might have been. It was a harsh lesson in the realities of power, especially for a woman in a man's world. Winter 1142. The biting cold had settled over England, and with it a renewed sense of desperation for Empress Matilda. Stephen's forces, invigorated by his release and Matilda's expulsion from London, had cornered her. They surrounded Oxford Castle, where Matilda was holed up with a skeleton garrison and dwindling sacks of grain. For 3 brutal months the siege dragged on. Siege engines flung stones, the river ice creaked ominously, and starvation began to prowl the castle's baileys, a silent, terrifying enemy. Conditions inside were dire. Matilda and her small garrison were cold, starving, and almost without hope. Stephen believed that capturing Matilda would decisively win him the war, and her escape to Oxford seemed like the perfect opportunity. He had overrun the town, seizing control of the city itself, forcing Matilda and her loyal few into the castle. He knew taking the castle by force would be difficult, even with the newest siege technology, so he opted for a long, grinding wait, hoping to starve her out. But Matilda, as we've seen, was not one to surrender easily. On a December night, sharp enough to kill sparrows in midair, a night shrouded in snow, a plan was hatched. It was a daring, almost cinematic escape. Matilda, with a small bodyguard of 4 knights, donned a white cloak, a brilliant piece of camouflage against the snowy landscape. She slipped past snoring sentries, her movements silent, ghostly. She walked across the frozen river Isis, the ice groaning underfoot, while enemy torches hissed nearby, their light glinting off the snow. She climbed the opposite bank, her breath misting in the frigid air, and rode through hostile country to the safety of Wallingford, a castle held by her staunch supporter, Brian Fitzcount. The escape was so dramatic, so extraordinary, that later poets couldn't help but embroider it with romantic details. Ropes, abseiling, even angels holding lanterns to guide her way. Modern historians, ever the pragmatists, suggest she probably used a postern gate, a small secret back door, and bribed a boatman to ferry her across. But the white cloak, the image of her vanishing into the snow, that detail stuck. Why? Because it fit the myth she was building, a sovereign who could vanish into thin air rather than surrender, a woman who defied capture and the odds. Oxford fell the very next day, but by then Matilda was long gone. Her miraculous escape meant that the anarchy continued for another 10 years, neither side able to achieve a decisive victory. The legend of the snow ghost, the empress who outwitted her besiegers, gave Englishmen something to whisper about around their fires for centuries. It was a powerful act of defiance, a testament to her sheer will, and a moment that cemented her place in popular imagination, even if the crown itself still eluded her. After the dramatic escape from Oxford, the Civil War entered a new, wearisome phase. Neither side, Stephen nor Matilda, could quite finish the job. It became a grinding stalemate, a war of attrition where castles swapped hands like trading cards. One day a lord might pledge allegiance to Stephen, the next to Matilda, depending on who offered the best deal or who was closest with an army. The constant conflict bled the country dry. Peasants learned to plow their fields with one eye constantly on the horizon, ever watchful for raiding parties or marching armies that could destroy their crops and their livelihoods in an instant. The church, witnessing the widespread suffering and the breakdown of all order, desperately begged both parties to stop breaking the harvest, to bring an end to the ceaseless violence. Matilda, now primarily based in Devizes, continued to govern the territories she controlled in the west. She appointed sheriffs, issued charters, and maintained a semblance of administrative order. But she also had her eyes on the future, playing a much longer game. Her teenage son, Henry, was touring Aquitaine, being groomed for leadership, learning the intricate dance of ducal politics. This wasn't just a boy. This was her legacy, her ultimate weapon in the fight for the crown. She also opened unofficial channels with the church, understanding its immense power and influence. When the politically savvy Bishop of Winchester, Stephen's brother, switched sides, it wasn't brute force that swayed him. It was Matilda's silver tongue, her diplomatic skill, and her ability to articulate a compelling vision for the future that did the twisting. She was a master of persuasion, able to win over powerful allies through negotiation and promises. By 1148, Matilda made a strategic decision. She judged shrewdly that she could do more for her cause from Normandy than from an English siege tower. The fighting in England had become cyclical, exhausting, and ultimately unproductive for her direct involvement. So she sailed to Rouen, leaving England to the chaos she had, in many ways, helped bake. Historians sometimes call this retreat a failure, a sign that she had given up. But honestly, I think that's missing the point entirely. It was, in fact, one of the smartest moves she never gets full credit for. She stepped sideways, removed herself from the direct, bloody grind of the conflict, and allowed Stephen to age out, to wear himself down. More importantly, she dedicated herself to grooming Henry, her brilliant and ambitious son, to finish what she had started. From Normandy, she continued to advise him, to provide political counsel, and to manage the affairs of the duchy. She understood that sometimes true power lies not in the direct fight, but in patiently preparing the next generation for victory. It was a testament to her long-term vision and her unwavering commitment to her dynastic ambitions. Henry Empress Matilda's eldest son, was every inch his mother's child. He was restless, articulate, and seemed to have an almost genetic allergy to losing. He possessed a drive, an intelligence, and a strategic mind that mirrored Matilda's own. He was not just a prince, he was a force of nature in the making. In 1153, this young, ambitious Henry landed in England. He brought with him mercenaries, yes, but more importantly, he had time on his side. The tide of the war had begun to turn in his favor. Stephen, exhausted by years of conflict and personal tragedy, was losing his grip. His eldest son, Eustace, a potential successor, had died of a sudden illness while plundering church lands. This was a devastating blow for Stephen, removing his own dynastic hope. His second son, William, was no warrior, lacking the drive and military prowess needed to secure the throne. The two armies, those of Stephen and Henry, finally stared across the River Thames at Wallingford. But instead of clashing in another bloody battle, bishops scurried between the camps, desperate to broker a peace to end the 18 long years of the Anarchy. The country was weary of war, the nobility tired of shifting allegiances, and the church yearned for stability. Finally, a deal was hammered out, the Treaty of Westminster, also known as the Treaty of Wallingford. It was a pragmatic, almost revolutionary agreement. Stephen would rule for the remainder of his life, but upon his death, Henry, Matilda's son, would inherit the crown. It was a victory for dynastic continuity, a recognition of Matilda's enduring claim through her son, and a promise of peace. Just 1 year later, in 1154, Stephen coughed himself to death in Kent. And on December 19, 1154, the stage was set for a new era. Henry II, Matilda's son, sat in Westminster Abbey, ready to be crowned King of England. And who was there, watching from the choir, tears streaking a face that had waited 19 long, arduous winters for this exact moment? Empress Matilda. She never pressed for a crown again herself. She didn't need to. Her blood was now the bloodstream of every English monarch to follow. The Plantagenet dynasty, one of England's most powerful and enduring, had begun, all thanks to her unwavering will and strategic foresight. Her son's coronation was her ultimate triumph, a vindication of her fight, and a testament to the fact that sometimes true victory lies not in wearing the crown yourself, but in ensuring your legacy reigns supreme. She had not only secured her son's future, but had fundamentally reshaped the course of English history. After her son's coronation, Matilda spent another 12 quiet yet influential years in Normandy. But don't mistake quiet for inactive. She wasn't just knitting by the fire. Oh no. She continued to be a formidable political force, corresponding with her son, arbitrating disputes, and occasionally, I imagine, reminding him exactly who had taught him to read those crucial parchments and navigate the treacherous waters of power. She acted as an advisor and diplomat, leveraging her extensive political experience, and even concerned herself with the administration of Normandy on his behalf. She was instrumental in shaping the early years of Henry II's reign, providing counsel and even attempting to mediate during the Becket controversy, a testament to her continued influence. When she died in 1167, at the age of 65, the chronicler of Tours wrote a fitting epitaph: "A woman who wore the purple without the crown, yet gave the crown to her stock." Think about that for a moment. It perfectly encapsulates her extraordinary life. She commanded the respect and authority of a monarch even without the physical emblem of power, and through her the royal lineage was secured. She was buried at Bec Abbey, her tomb later moved to Rouen Cathedral. And yet, despite this profound impact, English law still lists the monarchs: William, Henry, Stephen, Henry. Matilda's name is conspicuously absent. It's a bureaucratic shrug, a historical oversight that, to me, hides a seismic truth. Without her stubbornness, her resilience, her unwavering belief in her own right, there is no Plantagenet age. No Magna Carta, that foundational document of English liberties, would have come about in the same way. No Tudor break from Rome, no Elizabethan Golden Age, no vast empire upon which the sun never set. Her struggle for legitimacy directly led to the establishment of the most influential dynasty in English history. She is, every bit, the mother of England's story, the progenitor of a line that still sits on the throne today. She's just not in the official family photo, so to speak. It's a glaring omission, a silent testament to how history, particularly medieval history, often struggles to properly credit and acknowledge the power and influence of women. Her legacy is literally etched into the DNA of subsequent monarchs, yet her name was sidelined. So why do we forget her? Why is this incredible woman, this pivotal figure, so often relegated to the footnotes of history? Well, you can largely blame the victors' pens, can't you? History, as they say, is written by the winners, the monks who enjoyed Stephen's generosity, The ones whose abbeys benefited from his patronage often painted Matilda in a harsh, unflattering light. They described her as haughty, proud, and inflexible. These chroniclers, often the primary sources for later historians, certainly weren't unbiased. They had their own agendas, their own loyalties, and their own ingrained prejudices against female rule. Poets who adored Eleanor of Aquitaine, Henry II's wife, and a figure of immense charisma and political skill, found Matilda too austere, too serious, too unromantic for their tales. She didn't fit the mold of the idealized courtly lady. Later historians, perhaps uncritically, repeated these slurs, these biased accounts, until they calcified into accepted fact, becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy of historical neglect. And to make matters even more confusing, there's the name issue. She's sometimes called Maud in some roles, Matilda in others, adding another layer of ambiguity and making it harder for her story to stick in the collective consciousness. It's the perfect recipe for historical amnesia. Beyond the biased chroniclers, we also need to consider the broader societal context. The 12th century was deeply patriarchal. The idea of a woman ruling in her own right was revolutionary and deeply unsettling to many, especially the powerful male nobility. Women's power was often tied to their marital status or their ability to act as regents for absent husbands or underage sons. Matilda, by actively seeking to rule as queen, challenged these fundamental norms head-on. She was a trailblazer, but trailblazers often face immense resistance and sometimes are deliberately obscured by those who wish to maintain the old order. But here's the kicker, the undeniable truth. DNA doesn't forget. Elizabeth II, Charles III, every prince and princess waving from those palace balconies, they all carry her chromosomes. The forgotten queen, the woman who fought so fiercely for her birthright, is literally written into the genetic fabric of every coronation oath we still chant today. Her biological legacy is undeniable, a silent testament to her enduring impact, even if her name is often omitted from the history books. She shaped the very lineage of England, whether the chroniclers wanted to acknowledge it or not. So, next time you picture medieval England, all knights and castles and kings, do me a favor. Spare a thought, just a moment, for the woman who rode through snow, who issued charters, who minted her own coins, and who, with fierce determination, nearly bent an entire kingdom to her will. Empress Matilda didn't wear the crown, not officially, not with the full pomp and circumstance she deserved. But make no mistake, she forged the hinge upon which English history turns. Without her, the story we know, the dynasty that followed, would be profoundly, irrevocably different. Her struggle wasn't just a personal quest for power. It was a battle that challenged the very notions of gender and leadership in the medieval world, paving the way, however indirectly, for future queens. She reminds us that the most impactful figures aren't always the ones who get the loudest applause or the most prominent statues. Sometimes the real architects of history are the ones whose names we have to actively seek out, the ones who fought against the current and left an indelible mark despite being written out of the official narrative. If you enjoyed dragging her out of the shadows, if her story resonated with you, then please tap that like button. Subscribe for more forgotten tales, and tell me in the comments which other overlooked ruler you want rescued from obscurity next. Until then, keep questioning the footnotes, because sometimes the most important names are precisely the ones they tried and failed to erase.